Ryan, evening.
Evening. What can progressive parties in Scotland learn from the rise of far-right populism to better connect with the working class and with disillusioned voters?
Interesting. Ryan, what do you think?
I think a lot of us are worried about the increasing popularity of National Rally in France, of the AfD in Germany, Trump in for his second term. And I think, whether we find this distasteful or not, something they are saying is cutting through that progressive parties, mainstream parties, are failing to do. We get told by Westminster that there's 0.1% economic growth and that we should be happy about that. But, we've got rising inequality, we've got the working poor, and that is not connecting, but something that these, I guess, far-right populist parties are saying is, if you look at recent polling, if you look at the increasing support for the likes of Reform.
OK, you'd put Reform in with that as well, would you?
Sorry, Councillor, yes.
Yeah, OK. Do you recognise that description, far-right populism?
No,
for Reform, Thomas Kerr?
I think we've managed to get to a place in Scottish politics where the consensus bubble in Holyrood has pulled people so far to the centre that as soon as you're right-wing, you're seen as far-right. And I think that brandish of far-right has fallen away. I don't see Reform as far-right. I see other political parties that have been mentioned as far-right. I don't see Reform as being in that sort of angle, though. Going back to the original question about how progressives can try and change the narrative, obviously, for me, I don't think that they'll be able to be honest with you, because I think that the answers that many people on the left have are just so detached from many working class communities. So I represent Shelton in the East End of Glasgow. I spend all my time in the East End of Glasgow. I'm from Cranhill. I'm an East End working class guy. And when you're in these communities, they had had years and years of Labour in charge, and they were failed by them. They were then swapped by the SNP, and they gave them a chance. And then we had 14 years of the Conservatives. And obviously, in the intro that Stephen had said, I got so fed up and angry that I felt as if my voice inside my own party, when I was in the Conservatives, was not listened to, that working class communities had been left behind and forgotten. And I think that Reform is offering an opportunity for people to really speak up. So if you look at the policies that we have, we'll have policy platform properly ahead of Holyrood.
What we offering other parties aren't offering?
So we have principles that people know that we won't shirk on. So stuff like the fact that we think net zero, for example, is making people poorer. We think that the reality is everybody wants to try and tackle the climate emergency, absolutely, but having arbitrary targets on net zero is making every single person in this audience poorer. It's not making the political elite poorer, it's not making people in Holyrood poorer, but it's making my constituents in the East End of Glasgow poorer. It's making taxi drivers who have been sacked in Glasgow because of the low emission zone poorer. So I think that's one of the policies where we're very different from the other parties that are here. When you look at other stuff when it comes to wokeism, we're very, very clear on what it is a woman is. We don't want to get into these arguments about what women are and this sort of stuff. We'd much rather we focused our time in education on making sure standards are better, on making sure the apprentices are opened up, and making sure that people have a real opportunity in life. So I think that progressive parties will try their hardest, but when you spend as much time as I do in the East End of Glasgow, people are scunnered and fed up, and they don't hear any of the answers by the other panellists as a way of trying to make any change.
Thank you. And I know that we have Reform voters in the audience here this evening. You two have actually got history because you campaigned together back at the Rutherglen by-election before the defection took place, Craig Hoy. And that defection took place, Thomas Kerr says, because the Conservatives had lost touch with working class people in Scotland.
Well, I don't think that's the case. And actually, Thomas didn't think that was the case just a matter of months ago, because as you say, I was on the doorsteps of Rutherglen with Thomas, where he was making the point that it was the Scottish Conservative Party that was standing up for those bread and butter issues, those common sense issues. And I don't think anything's changed there. I mean, Thomas can account for why he's decided to move to Reform. There's lots of reasons people leave political parties, but it's not always on a point of principle. But let me be completely frank with you, Ryan, about that original question. Politicians that don't listen force people to the extremes. Now, you've seen that with the left in certain periods. You're seeing it to the right. And I think actually one clear example, if I go out into my local communities in the East Lothian or the borders or the southwest of Scotland, the area I represent, people say, what are you doing about the pothole that's just pranged my car? What are you doing about the safe spaces in school for my grandchildren or for my wife that's going to be in hospital next time around? What are you doing for the fact that I'm paying all this money in tax and council tax, but yet I seem to get less and less every single year? And if we continue to ignore people's real concerns, then I think people will move to the extremes in politics. But I think what I would say quite clearly, and under Russell Finlay, I think you've seen this in the Scottish Conservatives, is we're standing up for common sense, centrist Scottish Conservative policies. We're talking the same language that people out there in the country are. We'll bring forward policies that will be crystal clear about where we stand, and we've done that recently, and we'll continue to do that.
How worried are you about reform? I mean, speculation is they could take 15 seats next year.
This is the interesting thing, and it would be interesting to hear from Thomas, because who are Reform, and what do they ultimately stand for? We know that senior members of Reform and senior officials with Reform have actually come from the SNP. They want to break up Britain. We hear from Reform that they've got a very simplistic policy solution to stopping the boats, but it's one that's woefully impractical. And ultimately, between now and the election, I think it will be for us to set out a positive policy platform. But I think there's another issue here, because we've seen it in opinion polls and we saw it in the general election. In the general election, a vote for Reform often let the SNP win, because what you're doing is dividing a unionist vote that's already split. So not only are, I think, Reform quite soft on the union with senior members, Thomas isn't one of them, but senior members who actually support independence, people who vote Reform right around Scotland will wake up the day after the next election and find they've not got a Reform MSP, they've actually got another SNP MSP, and if that's what they want to do, then they are literally committing Scotland to another 5 years of a failed SNP government.
I think that's really, really important, because we've heard this, and I've argued this inside the Conservative Party when I was there for 14 years. This stripe of only a vote for the Scottish Conservatives can beat this or that. We have had 2 terms of an SNP and Green government, despite the rhetoric that the Conservative Party has put out. Now, Craig says that there are senior people, these big baddies in Reform, that nobody quite knows who they are. Not me, but apparently, but everybody else who is very, very soft on the union. Reform is an unashamedly pro-UK party. Now, that may make not some people in this audience
you were unashamedly a member of the Conservative Party 2 months ago.
And I was arguing inside the Conservative Party for a long time, Craig, that the direction this party was heading in was wrong.
You also tweeted last year that Reform were apologists for Vladimir Putin and pro-Indy. What changed?
So, well, the tweet that I had put out, and I could have, when I had decided to defect to Reform, I could have deleted every single social media post. I wanted to keep that one up because it was important to me to make the point that at that point, last July, I did believe that. But when I've seen the professionalisation of Reform, and I've seen the people who are in Reform, and when I see that what we've now offering people, I have a very different opinion on that.
OK, man with the beard and moustache in the middle, yes.
Hi there, yeah, a question particularly for Thomas. Are there no trans women in Cranhill or in the East End of Glasgow that need support and representation by politicians? And also, as a trade unionist myself, what is Reform UK? Because it is a UK party and you're sitting in Scotland. What is their policy on people's right to withdraw their labour and go on strike?
OK, I'll come back to you on it, Thomas. Let me just take one more. The gentleman at the back. Yes, on you go.
I just want to say that the right-wing parties are giving people targets to hate. People are angry. They're upset. We've had Brexit, we've had the pandemic, we've had the energy price crisis, the cost of living crisis, the war in Ukraine, everything that's going on in America right now. People are angry. They're scared of what's going on in the world. And the right-wing parties are saying, well, it's that guy's fault. And a lot of people who are not bad people are latching onto that and saying, well, I'm going to blame him as well because it makes me feel better. It gives me something cathartic. And that's why I think they're gaining traction with some people, because we have been left behind by the progressive parties, by the likes of the Tory party as well, especially in Westminster. Since Brexit, they've just been talking to themselves about politics instead of doing anything to make the country better.
Thank you. Fulton McGregor, SNP, have the traditional parties, progressive parties, have they left people behind?
Well, the first thing I want to say is you could probably do a spin-off show between Tory and Reform if you wanted to let them tear lumps out of each other. And I thought we were going to descend into that there, and myself and Monica wouldn't get back in for the rest of the night. But I want to address some of the questions. I do believe that Reform are a right-wing, far-right party. However, what's really important for me to say, and I think it's already been touched on by some of the audience, is not everybody who votes for Reform will be far-right. Far from it, actually. Normal people are obviously attracted to them.
And why are they doing that? Why are they attracted to them?
Well, I do think there is a dissatisfaction with politics as a whole. We've got to take some responsibility on that. The SNP, Labour, Conservatives. And if we look at what's happening in the UK as a whole, you know, there's no wonder there's dissatisfaction. So we do need to address that. I know that the First Minister's calling a summit in May, which will coincide with a year to the next Scottish Parliament election, to look at how the parties can, you know, work together to deal with the threat of the far right.
What do you mean by that? Work together to deal with the threat of the far right? What do you hope will come out of that summit?
Well, I think it's maybe having better politics. I think what I've found since becoming an MSP, and Monica touched on it in one of her earlier answers, is the public actually expect us to work together. They expect us to work together to find solutions. And we don't often do that, and we've got to take responsibility for that.
And you're not going to take part in this summit, the Scottish Conservatives, are you?
No, we haven't said that. What we're saying is we have had a hold the diary, a date. We don't actually know what the substance of the meeting will be. And I think the interesting thing will be, will that meeting be willing to discuss people's dissatisfaction, for example, with the SNP's gender recognition laws? Will they be willing to discuss all of the issues that are making people so angry?
Craig, you're just actually showing the point of why people are dissatisfied in moving to reform. Because you're laser focusing in on one particular issue, and you just want to bring it up for everything. The First Minister is offering a summit of all the parties to talk about how we deal with the threat of the far right. And there you are right on, well, we're not going to go if we're not talking about gender recognition.
No,
I mean,
Fulton, the point I'm making is we can only talk about the threat of the far right if that meeting will also discuss what has created the situation we're in. And I think that's the point. It can't just be a talking shop. We have to get to the nuts and bolts of that to understand why people are so dissatisfied with your government and with what's happening down south. But if we don't do that, it'll just simply be another SNP talking shop. No, well, that's not the case.
Let me hear from the lady in the front row here.
I think it's all very well looking at having summits and having chats and meetings.
Absolutely.
But I think the public here are saying to you guys, get back out in the street and ask the public. Why are they choosing reform? Why are they choosing you? You know, did Labour get in because they were absolutely sick, fed up with the Tories? Is that why they got in? You know, are SNP going to begin to get that? You have to stop meeting and get out and ask the public.
Yeah. Thank you. And lady with a short hair on the aisle there. Yes, on you go.
I think you all talk about the far right and everything like that. What we're really talking about is immigration. And we're talking about women's safety. I live in Cumbernauld, but I work in Glasgow. And I've got so many friends who've been followed from their houses and everything like that by people who are not Scottish, and they've been threatened and they feel uncomfortable about it. If you live in the south side of Glasgow, you can't walk past a tenement house without people sitting there smoking, whatever,
right.
And they make people feel
As soon as you said that, the lady next to you, her hand shot up. On you go.
I'm sorry, I just really don't agree with that. I don't agree with the whole... I understand everyone's fear with the whole immigration, the boats coming in, and I 100% I agree, like, I don't agree, but I understand everyone's point and take on it. But when you're saying there's people being followed and you're just generalising the whole race, really...
Have you walked around the south side of Glasgow?
I have, but I don't really feel particularly threatened by someone of a certain race, and I feel like that's the way you're kind of making it out there.
OK, all right. Monica Lennon. Do we need a summit to discuss the rise of the right?
Well, I think when the First Minister makes an open offer to bring parties together, I think that can only be a good thing. I think parties should engage in constructive talks. But to go back to the original question and to the point that was made by the lady in the front row about politicians getting out there, that absolutely is key, and that's certainly what Scottish Labour is doing. So in the coming weeks, the Labour MP Katrina Murray for Cumbernauld has Jackie Bailey and Anna Sarwar coming to have a listening event with people in the community.
What do you think we can learn
about the NHS? Because when we look at our casework and look at the inquiries coming in for help, it is people who are waiting too long for GP appointments, for operations, social care packages that don't exist, problems in education, justice, local government, closures. We're sitting in Cumbernauld Theatre, which is at risk because of funding cuts coming from Creative Scotland. We can't allow these fantastic facilities to close. So, you know, Anna Sarwar is out there absolutely standing up for Scotland because he's listening every day of the week. Well, I can assure you he spends as little time as possible in Parliament, so he's out there in the community meeting with businesses, with workers, with communities, because that's the only way we're going to get our policies right. And
Monica, Reform came third here at the general election. The question is, what can we learn from the rise of Reform and other parties on the right?
Well, I think we can recognise that people are a bit scunnered with the way politics has been done in this country for, you know, easily the last decade, and under the 17 years of the SNP, you know, there has been a lot of hype and there has been some good things too, but then I think people are now feeling things are not getting better. So people, I think, are putting the main parties on notice to say, look, there's someone else, we can put in a protest vote. But if you vote for Thomas, who's been in, I think, maybe three parties now.
Like most voters in Scotland, Monica, I went from Labour to Conservative to Reform.
Led by Nigel Farage, who's been in many parties and they've all ended in disaster. I would not put my trust in Nigel Farage.
Okay, just briefly, Thomas.
Briefly on one point, because people are asking about the scurriness and why people are fed up with politics. They're fed up with politics because of politicians like Anas Sarwar, who says he's going to back Grangemouth and then doesn't, who says he's going to back the WASPy women and then doesn't, who says he's not going to support welfare cuts and there won't be any austerity and then does. So I hope Anas's visit here goes very well, but I would be very reluctant for people in Cumbernauld to believe a word that he has.
All right, let's wrap this up with the audience. Lady with the fabulous hair on the second back row. Yeah.
Thomas, I find it funny how you're saying you're not a far-right party. Your leader was tried to get into Trump's inauguration. You've got them over there trying to talk about Scottish issues, which JD Vance talking about buffer zones. They're coming after us here, and you're trying to say, no, we're nothing like them. Your leader was there.